Hello everyone and welcome to the recap show of the Saint Louis Rapid Blitz. My name is Tatev Abrahamyan and I'm going to take you to the highlights of day 1 of Blitz. So today there were 45 Blitz games that were played, which is an overwhelming amount of games, so there is no way I can go through all the key moments or through all the highlights. So what I've chosen to do is to go through the highlights of the top 3 players, the players who are currently in top 3. So there's gonna be a bit of a spoiler, but not too much surprise considering how the tournament ended yesterday, where Wesley So was in first place and Magnus Carlsen in second, and there was some fight for third place between Nepo and Hikaru and Chris Chook because they were all very close. So there's been some changes. Right now Magnus Carlsen leapfrogged Wesley So, and so it's Magnus Carlsen, Wesley So, and in third place we have Nipponichi. So you guys can tell me in the comments if this is not how you wanted to do it, but this is what I've chosen to do today. So we have a lot of games to go through, so let's get started. So in the very first round we already have a very juicy matchup between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. And I already talked about their great rivalry over the summer, so let's jump to move 21. So this was a really nice game by Magnus Carlsen, and I think you're just gonna be in awe by his play. So I'm actually going to go to most of his games because he had 8 decisive results, and it was like a roller coaster of emotions today. So there's a lot to get through and a lot of fun moments. So he goes e5, great move, not surprisingly. So h4, pushing the pawn. And what I want to show you is this endgame moments where he allows this double pawns, and just check out what he does after, which is so amazing to me. Putting the pawn on f5, this dominant bishop, the king runs to e4. Not much for Hikaru to do, unfortunately. And the part that I want to show you is here. Takes on g7 and transposes into a winning rook endgame. And you could see Hikaru was very unhappy, shaking his head. It's not a secret that he does show a lot of emotion during the game, which is especially nice during this kind of a tournament where you have a shot of his face so you can actually see every emotion that he goes through. So pushing the pawns. Of course cannot trade rooks and just goes after every pawn. So really nice way for the world champion to start his day with a win over Hikaru Nakamura. So let's jump to his second game where he plays against Jeffrey Zhang, the young American Grandmaster. So we will jump through the end where things get decided. So in this position, excuse me, g4 is played, and now we're going to see that there's a mating net because after this move, g5 and a really nice mating idea because the rook went to h3 and now rook cc8 and impossible to stop the mate. So really unfortunate. For a while the game was pretty close, pretty equal, but there were always some checkmating ideas, and of course the world champion is not the one to ignore them, and unfortunately this cost the youngster the game. So in the next game Magnus Carlsen actually lost his game against Pantala Harikrishna. So let's jump to move 50 and we'll take a look at Harikrishna's technique. So he's up 2 pawns but opposite color bishops, never easy. There are always some tricks in a position when we have opposite color bishops. So takes a pawn, so nice 3 pawns. And I really like this this final move that I'm about to show you. Chasing the bishop away, and now f7 is coming. So nice game by Pantala Harikrishna, defeating the world champion with the white pieces. So you know, Magnus Carlsen after losing a game is a very dangerous opponent. He's a dangerous opponent every round obviously, but after he loses he really wants to get back. So his next round opponent did not fare too well against him. Okay, so the next game we're going to take a look at is round 4 against Levon Aronian, and this game was absolutely crazy. Again, I cannot do it justice in this kind of a video. You would have to take a look at it yourself. I would suggest you do this, and I would suggest you take a closer look at every single game I go over. And this was a very high quality game, even with all the mistakes. Obviously it's a blitz game. So Magnus Carlsen is playing amazingly here. It goes e5. So here it's correct for him to go d6, but he moves the rook away, which is natural because the rook was looking sketchy there. And now we get this insane position, and it's going to get even more insane as we're going to see how these pawns are just starting to roll down the board. So he did steal a pawn on a7. I'm going a little bit fast because we're about to reach a crazy position. So we reach this position. There's an extra bishop on the board, but there is a lot of pawns rolling down, and such a scary position to play with no time on your clock. So h3, because the d6 pawn is his, he doesn't want this pawns moving, and of course his rook cannot leave. There's some back rank issues. Runs back. I don't even know whose side I would rather be on. So apparently in this position rook g8 is a very great move, which actually makes sense because you just want to defend this pawn. This rook is kind of out of play, and just start rolling this, start pushing this pawn, and 3 pawns on the third rank. Not going to be pleasant. So instead he checks, and again he has very little time on the clock, and f2 is of course a blunder because now all the pawns hang, and he doesn't have time to play e2 with a tempo. I mean, something like this happened in a few moves because check, and then we're just going to grab this pawn. So instead he takes. So had he gone e2, rook c1, let me go back. So had he done something like this, we would take here. And it would be very similar to what we have in the endgame. So this would be, I mean, the game. So these are very similar lines. And now the pawn just runs. Takes, but now there is no stopping the pawn, and the white king is shouldering the black king. And unfortunately these checks don't help as he just runs away. I'm not sure why he went there and not here. I don't think it makes a difference. I mean, you're allowing a few more checks, but can just run away. And the game is just over. So really nice win by Magnus Carlsen, who now has 3 out of 4. And he did have the best result of the day, which we can conclude just based on the fact that he leapfrogged his opponent. His rival, rather. Okay, so let's take a look at the next game where he's playing Jan Nepomniachtchi, and we are going to jump to move 49. So he did lose this game. So I did tell you he had all decisive games except for the last round where he drew Wesley So. So every game we see is going to be decisive. So I just want to show you the final of the position where rook c4 unfortunately loses to a skewer. And I will also go back and show you the opening. Maybe you can try taking a guess. Something he promised that he will also play tomorrow because Nepo that is, he doesn't feel like it's realistic for him to catch the leaders. So he played 1b3. So hopefully we'll see more of this tomorrow because it's definitely going to be entertaining. Alright, so next game was Magnus versus Chris Chook. So this was a demolition. Chris Chook did not fare too well. So he did beat Magnus yesterday, but today it did not go too well. So if we take a look at this position, immediately this stands out as well as this. And the reason I'm showing you this game is because he does a rook lift, and rook lifts are my favorite idea in chess. And swings the rook over, so now the rook on b1 became an attacking piece, so now it's going to be really hard to defend that king on h8. So another piece joins the attack, and it's becoming very difficult to defend everyone, and particularly this bishop on e6, to be more specific, because the queen moves, we just take the bishop. King on e1 is perfectly safe, black just finished development, so things did not go well for the Russian Grandmaster. So the next game is going to be one of the wildest games of the tournament. And I suggest you guys go and check out Magnus's reaction after this game was over. You can check it out on Saint Louis's Twitter account, Saint Louis Chess Club's Twitter account. He was absolutely disgusted. He was just like how is this possible? And Firouzja was kind of laughing after the game, like it kind of more like when you can't believe it happened kind of laugh, because this game was another roller coaster. And I know I've said this about a lot of games, but a lot of the games have been a roller coaster. All right, so let's start in this position. So rook 1 c4 is played. Magnus misses bishop e8, and now young Firouzja wins a queen. But the position is locked, so he sacrifices a bishop. King goes back. Very subtle threat of mate in 1. Attacking the bishop and rook f7. So the correct way of winning was take, and take on h3. And taking on h3 is a move that Firouzja said that he forgot about. But this is completely winning, and as I mentioned yesterday, if you checked out that video, 2 pawns on a 6th rank are unstoppable by the rook. So for example, if you take this, I can already do this, and we're queening. And if you play king g7, e6, the problem is, for example, if I play d7 here, then you have this nice move of king f6, and now the pawns are stopped. But I do play e7 with a tempo. If e7 was not a tempo, you would be able to play king f7 and stop the pawns again. But because e7 is a tempo, this is not working out really well. So really disappointing result for Firouzja, of course. You know, beating the world champion is not an opportunity you get every game. So to let this go, he was not. I mean, after the game, he was just like, how did this happen? But yeah, even post-game interview, he said that he had so many good positions today, just didn't understand how he kept messing them up. And let's take a look at our final game by Magnus Carlsen against Lanier Dominguez. And this game, there was a huge blunder. I will just show you that moment. Magnus plays rook e2, and Dominguez, of course, has rook f8, and because of back rank, and actually it's funny that the rook is placed specifically on e2, so you don't have bishop d3 covering the back rank. So this would just win a piece, but this was missed. So I will take you to the key position because a lot happens, and I don't want to go through every single move. So I will take you to this position, so opposite color bishops, and I think it's easy to become complacent in this kind of positions because you think you build a fortress and the game is over, like it's a draw, like everything is good, and one mistake and the game is over. And especially against someone like Magnus, who will play until the very end. So here, king a4, and Dominguez plays his harmless looking move king g7. He should have played bishop d2, and I will show you why. And after a3, the bishop has to stay on the diagonal, and now there's just no way to defend 2 pawns. So bishop d2 had to be played, just so a move like a3 could be met with bishop c1. And the king cannot really leave the bishop, the king cannot leave the pawn, so we can just wait with the king, and this is a very easy draw. Because the bishop can just stay on b4 and go to e1 when necessary, and just stay on the diagonal to defend the pawn. So a very unfortunate loss by Dominguez, but you know, it is a blitz game, and with no time on the clock, I feel like this kind of endgames are very easy to lose. Alright, so that was Magnus's day, a total roller coaster, but you know, if Magnus's worst day is, or a bad day, as maybe he thought, because he was quite unhappy about a few of his games, is 6.5 out of 9, then so better than anyone else's, better than any of my good chess days. Alright, so let's move on to Wesley So. So Wesley So actually started his game with a loss against the young American Grandmaster Jeffrey Zhang. And I feel like this was an actually very instructive endgame, and I really like how Jeffrey played this. So rook d5 was played, which is an excellent move, because if the king attacks your pawn, you can defend it from this way, and now you're getting ready to push your pawn. So the rook goes there, defending. And here he actually makes a mistake. He should have just kept pushing his pawn, I believe. Sorry, so actually this position was the mistake. He should have played rook e5 attacking this pawn. Instead he plays rook d2, king f1, and here there's this amazing resource which impossible to find, is to play rook f4 with the idea of king f1. So we cannot push this pawn because this pawn will be lost, and otherwise let me go back to the position. Otherwise, if you move your king, well, you cannot move your king because I have e3. But let's say I make some kind of a move, and now king f1, and the pawn is lost. So for example here, and it's going to be queen versus queen. So white will queen and black will queen, and the game will end in a draw. So this was an amazing resource, I think very, very hard to find. We're going to see this in some kind of an endgame book at some point. Instead, king f3 is played, which is, I think, is a more natural move. It's a tempo move. You defend your pawn, you attack the rook, you have no time on your clock. So now he plays this very correctly. And kind of a Lucina position, even though the rook is not on the right the rook is not on the right rank. Usually it's on the fourth rank, but here rook b2 doesn't quite work out because the pawn falls. So instead rook d2 is played, and rook b3 I really like because you don't want to queen and lose your rook, and then you have to start winning all over again, and you're just getting a full queen. So really nice game by Jeffrey Zhang, delivering Wesley So his first loss of the day in the very first round. So Wesley So recovered very quickly in his second game by defeating Pentala Harikrishna. This was a really nice game by Wesley. He just, if you can guess the opening, was another Karo Khan, which means seems to be the theme of the tournament. So f5 was played, e6, and just destroying this king. Trying to trap the bishop with h5 and h6, and just completely destroying the king side. So we're taking. So he had a great move of playing bishop h5, so the knight would fall with a check. Instead he takes, and in this position the computer just gives zeros, which is kind of difficult to figure out. After rook cf8 it says the position is equal, which is, if you look at this position, it's anything but equal or anything but zeros. But again, this is something that's hard for me to explain in this kind of a video, and like I would have to spend some time trying to understand this myself. I guess the whole idea is instead rook gf8 was played, but I think the idea is to keep this rook here, and of course this rook cannot leave because of a checkmate threat, and of course we cannot take. Okay, but instead this was played, and okay, some trades happened, and just grabs the piece. So nice recovery. So the next game was a draw, and the final decisive game by Wesley So was in round 4 against Nepomniachtchi. This was a really nice game, and I think he showed really nice technique, and he's very good at this kind of position. I feel like technical position where he needs to convert. Okay, so let's get started from here. So rook d1 is played, so he gets a great position out of the opening. It's a Grunfeld, and the bishop is not where it belongs. It's on the wrong diagonal in some way. In some way it's in a good diagonal, but obviously white is doing really well because here you're just starting to figure out there are no moves. So he wins a queen, and now let's check out his technique. Exchanging a pair, a4, and now we'll start harassing on the king side. So a5, okay, losing the pawn was of course not ideal, but I really like this part. The queen e3, so of course trading down turning a king and pawn endgame does not work out because you're not even close to being on time. I'm now pinning the rook, so there's you cannot take with the bishop. I will take the rook. So let's check out how this game ends. The king goes to g5, so really nice zugzwang. Cannot go to this side because the pawn is queening, so it was just too much material. And Wesley So went on to draw the rest of his game, so he fell half a point behind Magnus Carlsen. So there was some kind of a battle for third place between, as I mentioned, Nepo, Nakamura, and Chris Chook. A lot of drama, and yesterday Chris Chook was joking that his goal for the tournament was to finish 9th, and he was like, "Oh, nothing has changed." That's what he said after he finished in top 3. And today Nepa was joking, saying the same thing, like, my goal is also not to finish not to finish last, which was Chris Chook's point. You know, it's always unpleasant to finish last. All right, so let's check out Nepa's tournament. So we already saw a couple of his games against So and against Magnus. So let's check out his first game. It was actually his first game, was a draw against Alexander Grishuk. So let's check out his second game against Alireza Firouzja, and this is one of the games that Alireza won in this tournament, and this was just a crazy wild game. And what I want to show you is this opposite color bishop position, because oftentimes opposite color bishop positions are just assumed to be drawn, but when there's a lot of material on the board, opposite colored bishops are very dangerous. And we're going to see how this king is going to get checkmated, actually. Spoiler alert. So check. Cannot take. And mate is coming. And the final game we're going to check out by Nepo is going to be his last round game against Hikaru Nakamura. This game was full of emotion. Again, there's a clip on the Saint Louis Chess Club Twitter channel, which you should check out. Hikaru was very not pleased with himself throughout the game. I think with some of the decisions, he was just visibly like, what am I doing here? So he takes on e6, after queen d7, he takes on e6, and a decision that he lives to regret. So the rook goes to d1. Trying, again, opposite color bishops, but a lot of pieces on the board, so the position is quite dangerous. Rook f8, and the rook f8 was a threat. And a bit of a repetition of a position, very disappointing move to play. I mean, it's already hard to suggest a good move. Rook g7 is mate. So in this position he moved the rook away from g6, so the king would have a g6 square, and this is some kind of a glitch that happens to chess players sometimes. You kind of forget why you made a move, so it goes back and he gets checkmated. But honestly, it's really hard to suggest a good move, because if you do something like this, I mean, okay, you're just losing material, so this is not much consolation. Yeah, so a pretty heartbreaking way to lose a game anyways. It's always unpleasant to lose the last round games, regardless of what happens and how the tournament is. It's just kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth, but there's another day tomorrow with 9 rounds, so if he has a good day tomorrow, there can be a big turnaround. And finally, I wanted to show you 2 more games by Alireza Firouzja, because I know he's a big fan favorite, and his style of play is very exciting, which I'm a big fan of, because I like attacking chess, I like aggressive chess, and he's a very exciting player, and he has this energy of youth. So let's check out his last round game against Pentala Harikrishna. So we see the king made his way to a3, and we're going to check out and see how the king got there. So the king starts on c7, so let's take a look at the journey of this king. So he is down a piece, but there is a pawn on f7, and there's a king on b6. There's a king on b5. check. Queen d7. And now that's just no good move. This gets mated, and he played this, and now he's losing his queen, and by losing his queen he's also going to lose his knight, and the game, especially because there's the fact that there is a pawn on f7, is going to make things even quicker. So really nice victory by the youngest player in the tournament, the 17-year-old Alireza Firouzja. And finally, the last game I want to show you is between Hikaru Nakamura and Alireza Firouzja. So Firouzja was on the losing side of this game, but I know also Hikaru is a big fan favorite, so this was the clash that everyone was looking forward to. So let's take a look at the final, or the key moments and the final moments of this game. So knight g4 is played, trying to exploit the dark square bishops, as we do see the queen perfectly placed. So check. And now this king is going for a walk. And I wanted to show this game because of where the king ends up. So we've seen several adventurous kings. So we see the king took quite the journey, ends up on d6 and rook d5. Really nice way of ending the game and winning the queen. So it looks like this is going to be a two-horse race between Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So. So Magnus Carlsen leads Wesley So by half a point, and Wesley So is 3 points ahead of Yanni Pomici. So unless there is some kind of a big result, or one person has a really bad day or another person has a phenomenal day scoring like 8 or 7.5, it looks like it is going to be between Magnus and Wesley So. So as usual, I encourage you to check out these games on your own. You can check them out on US Chess Champs. And make sure you're tuning in tomorrow for the final day of the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz. Thank you guys for checking this out, and see you tomorrow.